So I love this time of year. The days are getting longer, there's so much in front of us, it's getting warmer, and of course we've just had Cheltenham, and there's so much hype and activity that goes into Cheltenham that I don't think you can really close it out without actually reviewing what's happened. And I know these sort of videos aren't perhaps as popular as other ones that I've done, but I think they're important to do because there's so much hype and so much expectation as you head into Cheltenham. It's unfair if you don't actively review exactly what happened. But also, it's important for me, having been around for so long, to show you that what I do and the theory behind what I do is still perfectly possible. So with that in mind, let's have a look at the results from Cheltenham 2025. So one of the things I've got to say about Cheltenham is just how worthless all of these previews and other things are. They give you absolutely no direction apart from what is patently obvious within the market. And obviously they're just there to sort of hype things up, but they're very much often positioned as, come and visit our experts, they will tell you exactly what to do. And you should know that one of the first things that I do every year is I wrote to all of these people that do the preview evenings. I wrote to industry journals, to the radio and TV shows and stuff like that, and said, look, I'm going to try and win in all 28 races at Cheltenham. I did it last year. Isn't that interesting? And of course, every year I get exactly the same response, which is nothing, basically. They're not interested. If you ever want to understand what their incentive is, it's not to earn you money, it's to engage you, get interest, make you place a bet, and hopefully lose. And I say that slightly tongue-in-cheek, but ultimately that is, what their objective is. And I always find it disappointing that, I realise that what I do is unusual, but there are some really, really simple things that you can do that will make money, which I will mention before the end of this video, that doesn't require the same level of depth that I go to in terms of the trading. But also, think about it, thanks to technologies like total performance data, what I've been doing in the last couple of years is getting a really deep understanding of exactly how a race is run. And for the first time ever, I used that at Cheltenham. I traded in play properly for the first time. I'm usually so busy that I can't do that. But based upon the data and knowledge that I've gained in the last couple of years, I've been able to gain enough insight to be able to do that successfully at Cheltenham. And, even from that perspective, you would think that perhaps some of that would be of interest to people who are sort of bigging up Cheltenham and trying to give you some insight and knowledge that you may want to use. But anyway, let me head back into the office and I'll give you a rundown of exactly what happened at Cheltenham this year. So the first day at Cheltenham went exactly the way that you'd expect the first day at Cheltenham to go. I have highlighted this in other videos, but you sort of adopt a more cautious approach to it. And you don't know how the market's going to feel. There are no predominant trends or themes running through the meeting at this particular point. So the first day is all about sort of taking it carefully, testing the market, making sure you understand it, not making any assumptions, and just working your way through the card and trying to stay out of trouble. And in fact, the hardest race at Cheltenham is always the very, very first race because the money's had ages and ages to come into the market. It's sort of, I don't know how to describe it. It's sort of amorphous. There's a great word for you. Without shape or form. You can't feel anything within the market. There's nothing there. And in fact, the first race is very often the race where I'm most likely to lose money. So I'm always particularly cautious around here. And on the first race of the meeting, I banged in an absolutely stunning total of £5. So if you beat me on that, congratulations. But I always just try and avoid a loss on the first race and then get a feel for how the market is going. But once I'd got over that first bump, you begin to get a more natural flow coming into the market. And I was able to sort of get some fairly consistent results over the first day. And when it came to the last race, I was trying to push it just a little bit more because I knew I was just short of the grand on the day. However, I couldn't quite do it, but it was still a pretty good start to the week. So on day two, I always encounter the same problem again. First race of the day, tons of time for the money to come in, no sort of oomph within the market. But I still did a little bit better than day one, however. And it was a sort of an erratic day, but I did do better than the Tuesday, which was helpful. And there was a pattern of activity within the market that was a little bit more recognisable, something to build on. And on day one, we had a few winning favourites. But on day two, that really was not the case. And we had a couple of notable failures. And the interesting thing is that at the beginning of the meeting, there was a guy on X called Paul who posted up some really interesting info, which I retweeted for everybody. I do have this info, but he presented it in such a good manner and did such a great job of it that I had to retweet it. There was no point in trying to build upon that. It was good enough as it was. And he was saying more or less, don't go for these short-priced favourites at Cheltenham, because if you stick them into an acca, then you'll almost certainly end up busting yourself, because one of them always fails somewhere along the line. And Paul, you know what? You are absolutely correct. But yeah, it was a good day to sort of build on what I did on the Tuesday and then continue to push forward. So on the Thursday, you're always hoping to build on what you've learnt on the first 2 days of the meeting, and that's pretty much what I did. And the first thing that I learnt about the first couple of days is that volumes were up, and volumes were very healthy on both Betfair and BetStack. And that was allowing you to be a little bit more aggressive, pushing things a little bit further and trying to sort of get to those bigger totals. When you know that the market can sort of take those stakes and that the money is coming in and out of the market on a regular basis, the liquidity is high, then it makes you feel a little bit more confident in terms of pushing things a little bit harder. However, on this day, I completely messed up the very last race and just about got away with a profit. I was in a really good position. I was about 400 or 500 quid up on that particular race. And then I just overcooked it. And the market came up to me and then slapped me right round the face and taught me a lesson. So I managed to escape that last race with a small profit. But I felt that this was the worst race that I traded at the entire meeting. I was in a good position, everything was going particularly well, and I completely blew it. So my total on the Thursday would have been much higher if I just retained control over this particular race. And I felt like I did a particularly bad job because I was in such a good position, but I still managed to escape with a small profit. So we finally reached Gold Cup Day, and again, get off to a bit of a dodgy start in the first race. That's nothing unusual. I tend to be quite defensive. But as I entered this particular day, I knew that I was entering it having won on every single race. So if I could just do that on Friday, I would get another clean sweep. I'd win on all 28 races at Cheltenham again. And the funny thing is, you have to almost put that to the back of your mind when you're actively trading. It would be a nice thing to do, but you shouldn't let that stop you from finding opportunities. The best way I can summarize this is that, when you're trading, it's all about taking risk, not avoiding it. And it would have been very easy to play defensively and just get a 5 or a 10 on each race and get all 28 and go, hey, I've got all 28. But I don't consider that like a valid way of doing it. I go into the race, I have to look at everything from the perspective of an opportunity. And therefore, it's really important to go in and do the best that I can in every single market. And if I manage to go through all of them without a single loss, that's absolutely fantastic. But I shouldn't go into it with that as the objective. So yeah, that's a little bit of perspective on the psychology of coping with that on Gold Cup Day. But Gold Cup Day went really well. And the interesting thing about the day as well is there was a lot of activity in the Gold Cup market. And because we'd had a few short-priced losers earlier in the week, everybody was speculating and loads of money was going down on Galopin Des Champs. And as a consequence, I thought that maybe the market would pull it in, which is what it did. But as we got closer to the off, it started to push the price all the way back out again. And of course, this was one of the big odds-on favourites that lost and cost people a lot of money. But sort of the signs were there in the market and during the week that maybe this wasn't a year for very short-priced backers. And this also brings up a really interesting point here as well, is, I do lots of interesting and complicated things, and I'm trying to get every sort of angle that I can on the market and try and do as best that I can. But the fact is, if you backed every single favourite at Cheltenham, you would have lost money this year. However, if you would have laid every favourite to a £100 liability, you would have made £382. So it just goes to show you, you don't need to do anything complicated in order to be able to make money. And sometimes people do overcomplicate things. And, sometimes, just the simple stuff seems to work particularly well. And, obviously this was a theme that occurred with Cheltenham this year. Will it occur next year or whatever? But the thing is that when you look at all of the data, it does sort of hint that a lot of these favourites do tend to get overbacked. Maybe not quite as much as they did this year, but that is something to sort of bear in mind. Sometimes it isn't the complicated stuff that works particularly well, even though it does. Some of the simple stuff works particularly well too. But yeah, when I got to the end of the day, I was on a bit of a high because I knew I'd pretty much sort of sealed the deal as we came into the last race, and I traded that particularly well. And it rounded off the week perfectly, and I managed to go all the way through Cheltenham 2025 without losing a single race. And that is the first time that I've managed to do it over 2 consecutive years. And I almost did it over 3 consecutive years, apart from 3 years ago, I had a loss on 1 individual race. But yeah, once again, Cheltenham completely lived up to its billing as the best race meeting of the year. So I want to round off this video with an important point, and the P&Ls that I've shown you within this video are my manual trading P&Ls. They don't include anything that I did in play, they don't include automation or a variety of other strategies that I deployed. So the actual numbers that I achieved in this week was actually much higher than what you see. And the reason for showing you the manual P&Ls is because that's probably what most people are going to do, or it's the most reachable of the sort of things that I demonstrate. This is me on BetAngel, poking around, putting orders in the market, managing those orders, trying to do the best that I can, and all of those sort of things. And I think it's always important to show that this is still possible. You see a lot of people come and go in this industry, and I'm sure you've seen loads of betting systems over time. But bear in mind, the first time that I did or managed to win on every single race at Cheltenham in this manner was about 20 years ago, roughly 20 years ago or so. And of course I did it this year, I did it last year, and in the year before I actually only managed to get 1 race wrong. But you know, that is a very, very high strike rate. Part of that is because Cheltenham, it creates almost the perfect sort of trading conditions. But probably the key takeout that you should take from this video is that it's still possible to do. You know, by me sitting there at my desk, looking at what's going on at Cheltenham, poking around within BetAngel, has produced these results. There's nothing unusual or spectacular or amazing that I've done to achieve this. It's just good, solid trading. And I think that's always a positive, because when we start at this point in the year, there's still a lot of the year in front of us, still loads of opportunities. And I'm going to do my best to take advantage of all of those. And I hope that that is something that you will do too.